To be black in America is to have some relationship to the historic tragedy of slavery. American slavery, often referred to as a type of chattel slavery, was unique as a condition of servitude in the tortured history of forced bondage in the human race. Whereas, before the transatlantic slave trade, the institution of slavery, as it existed across continents and time periods, typically allowed forced servitude to exist as a consequence of military defeat or financial debt. Chattel slavery in the Americas relied on the active capturing or purchasing of Africans whose continued enshacklement was justified, in the racial ideology that evolved, as the proper expression of the natural hierarchy of the races. From such insidious origins, the evolution of many American institutions, and much in the way of the education and psychological formation of Black Americans themselves, was affected. Yet in recognizing this fact, Black Americans, and all Americans today, should also recognize that it is possible that the effect of slavery and racial oppression on our society today grows largely out of the power that we choose to give it. Slavery is limited in its ability to determine the success of Black Americans in our present day. The legacy of slavery is not what determines the fundamental character of our country, unless we choose for that to be so. In the spring of 2008, on the verge of winning the Democratic nomination for president, Barack Obama delivered a landmark address on the subject of race to a nation still somewhat dubious about the prospect of a Black man becoming president of the United States. Obama opened by making a quick reference to this nation's original sin of slavery, noting that it left unfinished the liberating work of the Declaration of Independence. Yet he proceeded to observe that in the ideals that informed America's founding were sown the seeds of its redemption. Of course, the answer to the slavery question was already embedded within our Constitution, a Constitution that had at its very core the ideal of equal citizenship under the law, a Constitution that promised its people liberty and justice and a union that could be and should be perfected over time. And yet words on a parchment would not be enough to deliver slaves from bondage and provide men and women of every color and creed their full rights and obligations as citizens of the United States, he continued. What would be needed were Americans in successive generations who were willing to do their part to narrow that gap between the promise of our ideals and the reality of their time. That is true. And this truth provides the understandable root of a claim by Nicole Hannah-Jones, chief editor for the New York Times 1619 Project, that our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written. Black Americans have fought to make them true. Indeed, Black Americans, alongside many others, have fought for generations to deliver America to her higher values. But there is something linguistically confused about suggesting American ideals, or anyone's ideals for that matter, are false. Ideals are not statements of fact to be true or false. They are just that, ideals. They are the better realities to which we aspire. Thus, the narrative of many individuals who believe the United States ought to be defined more by her moral failings than by her moral triumphs and aspirations tends to be one that de-emphasizes our nation's proven ability to overcome these moral failings. The heart of American history is diminished in so doing. There are sympathetic reasons for this way of seeing America, however, particularly when it comes to the moral failing of slavery. In his epic essay for The Atlantic, The Case for Reparations, Ta-Nehisi Coates asserts that the great thrust of Black history in America threatens America's ability to look at itself the way that it wants to.